Imagine being so confident in your superiority that you laugh at your enemy's ambitions. Not just chuckle, but genuinely mock them as delusional. That's exactly what Hermann Göring did in 1942. The head of the Luftwaffe, Hitler's right-hand man, a World War I fighter ace with 22 confirmed kills, heard President Franklin Roosevelt's declaration to Congress. America would build 50,000 aircraft per year. Göring's response? Laughter. Pure, dismissive laughter. "No one can build 50,000 planes a year," he declared. That's pure propaganda. He wasn't alone in his skepticism. Even some American industrialists thought Roosevelt was dreaming. The Japanese High Command dismissed it as typical American bluster. The entire Axis powers looked at this ambitious goal and thought, impossible. But here's what makes this story so powerful. By the time the war ended in 1945, the United States didn't just meet Roosevelt's goal. They didn't just exceed it, they absolutely shattered it, producing over 300,000 military aircraft in less than 6 years. This is the story of the greatest industrial achievement in human history. This is the story of how American assembly lines became America's secret weapon. This is the story of how Hermann Göring's laugh turned into a death rattle for the Third Reich. Before we dive into the numbers, we need to understand the man who laughed. Hermann Wilhelm Göring was born into German aristocracy in 1893. Unlike many Nazi leaders who came from humble or middle-class backgrounds, Göring was born with a silver spoon. His godfather was a prominent physician and friend of the family, and young Hermann grew up in literal castles. When World War I erupted, Göring found his calling in the sky. He joined the Imperial German Army Air Service and quickly distinguished himself as a fighter pilot. By 1918, he had 22 confirmed aerial victories and was awarded the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest military honor at the time. He even commanded the legendary Jagdgeschwader I, the fighter wing once led by the Red Baron himself, Manfred von Richthofen. After Germany's defeat, Göring was bitter. Like many veterans, he felt betrayed by the armistice and the harsh terms of the Versailles Treaty. He became a barnstormer, performing aerial stunts across Europe, until he heard Adolf Hitler speak at a beer hall in Munich. In 1922, Göring was captivated. Here was a man who shared his rage, his belief in Germany's greatness, his desire for revenge. He joined the Nazi Party immediately and became one of Hitler's earliest and most devoted followers. During the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, Göring was shot in the groin and barely escaped to Austria. During his recovery, he became addicted to morphine, an addiction that would plague him for the rest of his life and contribute to his increasingly erratic behavior and weight gain. But when Hitler came to power in 1933, Göring's loyalty was rewarded. He was given control of the Prussian police, helped establish the Gestapo, and then was handed his dream job: building Germany's new air force, the Luftwaffe. And oh, how he built it! By 1939, the Luftwaffe was the most feared air force in the world. It had pioneered tactical bombing during the Spanish Civil War. Its Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters were cutting edge. Its dive-bombing Stukas terrorized ground troops. When Germany invaded Poland, then France, then Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway, it was often the Luftwaffe that cleared the way. Göring's ego inflated along with his waistline. He draped himself in elaborate uniforms, collected stolen art from across occupied Europe, and lived in ostentatious luxury even as ordinary Germans endured rationing. He convinced himself and Hitler that the Luftwaffe was invincible. This was the man who laughed at America's industrial ambitions, a man who had never seen a country mobilize its civilian economy like America was about to do, a man whose entire worldview was about to collide with cold, hard reality. To understand the miracle that was about to unfold, you need to understand where America was starting from. In 1939, The United States military was ranked 17th in the world. 17th. Behind Romania. Behind Portugal, total American military aircraft production in 1939? Less than 3,000 planes for the entire year. The U.S. Army Air Corps had about 800 combat aircraft and 26,000 personnel. By comparison, the Luftwaffe had over 4,000 combat aircraft and hundreds of thousands of trained personnel. American aircraft manufacturers were small operations. Boeing, Douglas, Lockheed, Consolidated, North American Aviation. These were companies that employed hundreds or a few thousand workers, not tens of thousands. They produced aircraft one at a time, handcrafted by skilled workers. The idea of mass production for military aircraft was largely theoretical. But America had something no other nation possessed: the world's most advanced manufacturing infrastructure. Henry Ford had revolutionized automobile production with the assembly line. American factories had perfected mass production techniques that Europe had only begun to adopt. American industrial capacity was enormous. It just wasn't directed toward military purposes yet. The American economy in the late 1930s was still recovering from the Great Depression. Unemployment was high. Factories were running below capacity. There was a vast, underutilized labor force ready to be mobilized. President Roosevelt understood something crucial. America's greatest weapon wasn't going to be superior tactics or better generals. It was going to be production. Overwhelming, unstoppable, relentless production. On January 16, 1941, in his budget message to Congress, Roosevelt declared, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." The reaction was mixed. Some cheered the ambition. Many thought it was impossible. Aviation industry leaders said it couldn't be done without years of planning and infrastructure investment. And in Germany, when Hermann Göring heard this proclamation, he laughed. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Everything changed. Suddenly, those theoretical plans became urgent necessity. America didn't just need 50,000 planes a year. It needed them yesterday. What happened next is genuinely one of the most remarkable transformations in human history. The Roosevelt administration didn't just ask companies to build more planes. They fundamentally restructured how planes were built. First, they simplified designs. The B-24 Liberator bomber, which would become the most produced American military aircraft of the war, was designed with mass production in mind from the start. Its straight wing and slab-sided fuselage were less aerodynamically efficient than some competitors, but they could be manufactured quickly using relatively unskilled labor. Second, they broke assembly into modular components. Instead of building a plane from start to finish in one location, major assemblies would be manufactured in different facilities, then brought together for final assembly. This allowed for massive parallelization of production. Third, and most ingeniously, they brought in companies that had never built aircraft before. The most famous example? Ford Motor Company. In 1941, Ford Motor Company was approached with an audacious proposal. Could they apply their automotive mass production expertise to building bombers? Henry Ford was initially skeptical. His engineers examined the B-24 vs. 12, DT-24 Liberator, which had over 1 million parts, compared to about 15,000 for a typical car. They analyzed the tolerances required for aircraft, which were far tighter than automotive standards. They looked at the skilled labor required for riveting, wiring, and hydraulics. And then they said yes, but they would need to build a new factory. Not just any factory, the largest factory building under one roof in the history of the world. Ford purchased 975 acres of farmland near Willow Run Creek in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Construction began in early 1941, even before America entered the war. The main building would be L-shaped, stretching 3,500 feet long and 1,280 feet wide at its widest point. It covered 67 acres under one roof. Inside, Ford planned an assembly line that would move B-24 bombers from raw materials to finished aircraft in a continuous flow, just like cars at the Highland Park plant. Everyone thought they were crazy. Building bombers on an assembly line? Impossible. Bombers required precision engineering, skilled craftsmen, individual attention to detail. You couldn't just stamp them out like Model Ts. The initial production was indeed a disaster. The first year saw only 56 aircraft completed. Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator, toured the facility and publicly doubted it would ever meet its production goals. Newspapers called it Willow Rot and Will It Run, but Ford engineers kept refining the process. They developed new tools. They created training programs that could turn farmers and housewives into aircraft workers in weeks. They implemented statistical quality control. They obsessed over every minute of production time. And then, suddenly, it started to work. By 1943, Willow Run was producing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. One complete bomber, ready to fly, every single hour. At peak production in 1944, the factory employed over 42,000 workers and produced 9,000 B-24s in that year alone. That's more bombers than the entire German aircraft industry produced in some years. Willow Run became a symbol of American industrial might. Newspapers around the world published photos of bombers rolling off the assembly line like cars. Newsreels showed the massive factory floor with bombers in various stages of completion, stretching as far as the eye could see. When Hermann Göring saw intelligence reports about Willow Run, he reportedly dismissed them as propaganda. No one could build heavy bombers that fast. It was impossible. But it wasn't propaganda. It was reality. Willow Run, the factory that changed everything. The numbers that won the war Let's Talk numbers. Real numbers. The numbers that turned Göring's laughter into tears. In 1940, the United States produced approximately 6,000 military aircraft. In 1941, 19,000 aircraft. 1942, 47,000 aircraft. In 1943, 86,000 aircraft. In 1944, 96,000 aircraft. In 1945, through August, 46,000 aircraft total production from 1940 to 1945, approximately 300,000 military aircraft. Let me repeat that. 300,000 military aircraft in less than 6 years. Roosevelt's impossible goal of 50,000 planes per year. America exceeded it in 1943 and again in 1944. But it's not just the total numbers that matter. It's what those numbers represented. 18,493 B-24 Liberator. Heavy bombers, 12 through 7031 B-17 flying. Fortress heavy bombers, 16,766 B-25 Mitchell. Medium bombers, 815 B-26 Marauder. Medium bombers, 15,063 Theaters. 683 P-51. Mustang fighters, 15 660 P-47. Thunderbolt fighters, 12 routed 275 P-38. Lightning fighters, 606 A-20 Havoc. Attack aircraft, 10 Townsers 634 P-40 Warhawk. Fighters, and those are just the combat aircraft. The total includes thousands of trainers, transports, reconnaissance planes, and other support aircraft. For comparison, here's what Germany produced. Total German aircraft production during World War II. Approximately 120,000 aircraft across all types. The United States produced more than double what Germany did. And this is before we even count British, Soviet, and other Allied production. But raw numbers only tell part of the story. What really mattered was the rate of production versus the rate of loss. In 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing aircraft faster than they could replace them. Meanwhile, American factories were producing planes faster than they could be deployed. By mid-1944, there was actually a surplus of aircraft waiting to be shipped overseas. This meant that every American pilot shot down could be replaced immediately. Every damaged aircraft could be written off without concern. American commanders could plan aggressive operations, knowing they had unlimited equipment. German and Japanese pilots, by contrast, knew that every aircraft lost was increasingly difficult to replace. This created a defensive, conservative mindset that limited operational flexibility. There's an entire dimension to this story that often gets overlooked. Who actually built these planes? In 1940, the American aircraft industry employed about 46,000 workers, mostly skilled male craftsmen. By 1944, that number had exploded to 2.1 million workers. And here's the remarkable part. A huge percentage were women. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just propaganda. She was real, and she built your grandfather's bomber. At Willow Run, women made up 40% of the workforce at peak production. At some facilities, particularly in California, women comprised over 50% of workers. Many had never worked outside the home before. Most had never touched industrial tools. None had built aircraft, but they learned. Fast training programs compressed years of apprenticeship into weeks. Women who had been teachers, homemakers, secretaries, and store clerks became riveters, welders, electricians, and quality inspectors. They worked 10-hour shifts 6 days a week. They did precision work that required steady hands and perfect attention to detail. And they did it while their husbands, brothers, and sons were overseas, flying the very planes they built. The social transformation was profound. Women gained economic independence, technical skills, and confidence. Many would never return to traditional domestic roles after experiencing what they were capable of achieving. There were also significant numbers of African American workers who found opportunities in defense, industries that had previously excluded them. While discrimination remained widespread, the desperate need for workers created openings that would plant seeds for the civil rights movement of the following decades. The aircraft factories became melting pots of American society. College graduates worked alongside high school dropouts. Rural farmers worked beside urban immigrants. White workers, black workers, Hispanic workers, all united by a common purpose: build the planes that would win the war. This wasn't just an industrial miracle. It was a social miracle. The death of the Luftwaffe in 1944. The results of this production miracle were devastatingly clear. The Luftwaffe, which had dominated European skies in 1940, was being systematically destroyed. Not primarily by superior tactics or better pilots, though those mattered, but by simple arithmetic. American and British bombers struck German aircraft factories, but even when these raids were successful, the impact was limited because Germany simply couldn't match Allied production anyway. The Luftwaffe's decline was death by 1,000 cuts. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe had approximately 2,400 fighters defending Germany. By May 1944, that number had dropped to about 1,500, despite desperate attempts to increase production. During the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe flew approximately 300 sorties. The Allies flew over 14,000 kilometers over France. In the summer of 1944, Allied aircraft outnumbered German aircraft by more than 10-to-1 in many engagements. German pilots, often highly skilled and flying technically advanced aircraft like the Focke-Wulf FW-190 and later the jet-powered Me-262, couldn't overcome the numerical disadvantage. They might win individual dogfights, but there was always another wave of American planes behind the first. German ace pilots spoke of the overwhelming sense of futility. You could shoot down 2, 3, 4 American planes, and 10 more would appear. It was endless. It was suffocating. And through all of this, Hermann Göring's leadership of the Luftwaffe became increasingly erratic and delusional. He blamed his pilots for lacking courage. He blamed his engineers for not producing wonder weapons fast enough. He blamed saboteurs and traitors. He blamed everyone except himself and the fundamental reality. Germany had been outproduced. His relationship with Hitler deteriorated. His morphine addiction worsened. He retreated to his country estate and surrounded himself with stolen art, while the Luftwaffe he had built was systematically annihilated. In May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. Hermann Göring, stripped of his rank and positions by Hitler in the final days of the war, surrendered to American forces. During his interrogation and later at the Nuremberg trials, Göring was confronted with the stark reality of American production. One interrogator reportedly asked him about his dismissal of Roosevelt's 50,000 plane pledge. Göring, no longer laughing, allegedly responded that Germany had made a fundamental miscalculation about American industrial capacity. They had assumed American society was too soft, too divided, too democratic to mobilize effectively for war. They were catastrophically wrong. The numbers that Göring had dismissed as propaganda in 1942 were now undeniable facts. The aircraft production figures weren't Allied exaggeration, they were conservative estimates. The United States hadn't just met Roosevelt's ambitious goal, it had doubled it. In his cell at Nuremberg, awaiting execution, Göring had plenty of time to reflect on his laughter. That dismissive chuckle when he heard about 50,000 planes a year. The smug certainty that American industry couldn't possibly match German engineering and organization. He had been the head of the most feared air force in the world in 1940. By 1945, the Luftwaffe was a memory, and American planes filled the skies over a devastated Germany. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring committed suicide by taking cyanide. He denied the Allies the satisfaction of hanging him, but he couldn't deny the verdict of history. He had laughed at America's plan to build 50,000 planes a year. This story is ultimately about more than aircraft production numbers, though those numbers are staggering. It's about the danger of underestimating your opponent. It's about the power of industrial mobilization. It's about free societies rising to meet existential threats. It's about ordinary people, many of them women who had never worked in factories before, accomplishing something that experts said was impossible. The B-24s rolling off the line at Willow Run every hour weren't just machines. They were proof that democracy could outproduce dictatorship, that a free society could be more efficient, more innovative, and more determined than authoritarian regimes that prided themselves on discipline and organization. Hermann Göring laughed at America's industrial ambitions in 1942. By 1945, the laugh was on him, and the echo of that production miracle, the arsenal of democracy, would shape the world for the next 80 years. America didn't just win World War II with brave soldiers and brilliant generals. It won with factories, with assembly lines, with ordinary workers who built the tools of victory faster than the enemy could destroy them. Roosevelt's impossible goal of 50,000 planes a year wasn't just met, it was demolished. And in doing so, America proved that in industrial warfare, production capacity might be the most decisive weapon of all.